What's up, everyone? It's AG Reviews, back at it again. A few weeks ago, I got the chance to check out 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, so let's talk about it. To set the expectations of what my mindset was going into The Bone Temple, I was a big fan of 28 Years Later. I know it was a very divisive movie, and a lot of people were pretty mixed on it, but I was someone who really enjoyed the direction, the visual style, and just the return to this universe. 28 Days Later is one of my favorite films of all time, and I think is such a monumentally inspirational film for the zombie genre. I mean, it literally set the standard for this genre for years to come, and still even is influencing the modern day films that we get nowadays in this genre. So for me, I have always been a very huge fan of this series, of this franchise. I was not the biggest fan of 28 Weeks Later. That's probably the weakest of this series for me. But I still think that every film has something good to offer and brings a new, fresh, and unique style to the table. But with liking 28 Years Later, I can admit that there was some flaws with the film. It was not perfect. It was not my favorite film in this franchise. So with that being said, I think 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple is a pretty significant jump up in quality and is actually probably my favorite film in this franchise behind the original 28 Days Later. And what I think this film does better than the previous one is that there is a much more concerted effort to focus specifically on the human characters and the story. And it also is much more tonally consistent across the board. Even though I did like 28 Years Later, there was different vibes and different tones scattered throughout the film. It almost felt like three different movies kind of combined in one, where here with The Bone Temple, you get the same style, the same feel, the same vibe throughout the entire film. And for that, I really have to commend this film. It's no secret that Alex Garland is the writer of all three of these new films, and I think he had a beautiful script that he wrote here. But I believe that Nia DaCosta, the director of this film, takes that script and really gives it her own visual flair. I think she is one of the better directors nowadays in Hollywood, and I think she just hasn't had like her real fair shake when it comes to her movies. Obviously, she directed the reboot or requel of Candyman a couple years back. I wasn't the biggest fan of that film myself personally, but I did see the potential that Nia DaCosta could bring to the table. And then obviously she just got shafted when it came to the Marvels. I mean, that was a project that was heavily tampered with, heavily influenced by Kevin Feige, and she hasn't really had a project in my eyes that I've seen like The Bone Temple that really allows her to just shine through as a director and for you to get an idea of what kind of films that she can make. And from my understanding, even though she didn't write the script, she did a great job transitioning that script to this film, but making it feel like her own. When it comes to the tonal consistency, I think a lot of that credit should be given to Nia DaCosta because I think she is the reason that the movie feels as consistently good as it is. And like I said, this movie is much more focused than 28 Years Later was. There's really only two major plots going on here. There's the plot line with Dr. Kelson and Samson, which, I'm not going to go too deep into spoilers or too much into what happens there. But you have, him kind of experimenting with Samson, trying to figure out exactly what this virus does, how it controls people, and everything like that. And I thought that was very intriguing. I thought that brought up a lot of you know, a lot of the moral dilemmas about, how society is and what this virus has done, to the UK, essentially, since that's the only place where it's at, and how it affects the human mind and, like, whether or not, the someone is truly gone if they are infected. So, though that portion of the storyline, I really enjoyed. I don't want to get into too much without spoiling it, but I just really overall enjoyed the performances there from Ray Fiennes. And I don't know the guy's name. I'm blanking right now, but the guy who played Samson, I thought both of them did a fantastic job, and they had great chemistry. And man, then you got the second storyline with the Jimmies, led by Jack O'Connell, which he's becoming a breakout star. Specifically in these villain-esque roles. Obviously, he was really great as Remick in Sinners, and he is very, very menacing in this film as Sir Jimmy Crystal. And I really enjoyed what we got here from that gang and the storyline with Spike included. I will say I talked about how Nia DaCosta kind of made this her own. I will say the ending of 28 Years Later, after now seeing this film and seeing that scene with the Jimmies, feels a little bit weirder now that we've gotten the context of this full movie because it doesn't feel like anything that we got here. So that end credit in 28 years later feels even weirder than it did before. But yeah, everything that we got here from the Jimmies, I felt was really well done. It's become kind of a trope a little bit now in like zombie apocalypse style stories, but it goes the route of basically, asking the question of whether or not the humans who remain alive in these situations end up actually being worse than the monsters. So that moral dilemma is present here, but I think this movie does a really good job at asking that question the most effectively. So there was a lot that was well done here. Like I said, Jack O'Connell, fantastic performance. He is slowly becoming like the new like it horror villain guy. Where he keeps delivering these fantastic performances as the villains, but very layered performances. It's not just a one note, mustache twirling villain. He's really giving layered performances in these films, and I think he has a very bright future ahead of him. And I kind of already talked about it, but man, Ray Fiennes, he's kind of having like a bit of a career resurgence here in the last couple years. Between this performance, what we got from him in The Menu, he is just taking on these very complex characters, and he's just knocking it out of the park. I was, obviously a little disappointed with 28 Years Later and how little we got of his character. But he did have, one of the most poignant and, like, emotional moments in that film last year when it came out. And that just carries over here. His character in this film is just so interesting, so poignant. There's a lot that he brings, and he kind of has a different perspective than everybody else in this world about the virus, about the way the world has been changed, and it's just a refreshing character to see, and a refreshing story that they take with him. And I will say, even though I think the zombie stuff is pretty dialed back in this movie does get pretty violent at certain points. And that comes by the way of the Jimmy crew. I think the opening sequence of this film was like masterfully well done. It basically picks up exactly where we left off in 28 Years Later with the Jimmy crew discovering Spike and kind of initiating him into the crew. That whole sequence was fantastic. There's a whole sequence on a barn that is really fantastic as well. And then you kind of get the climax scene, that we have right here. I will say, if you haven't seen the film, the context in which this scene is going on is something that is really crazy and something you would have never expected. But then the way it plays out in the film is just so masterfully done, and it just works so well. And I think that's one of the really strong points of this film is that the story that they take here, and the themes that they discuss, and the storylines they go through with, I just wasn't expecting. But it's done well, right? It's a subversion of expectations, but it's done in a way where once you sit on it and you think about what you just watched, you're like, wow, that was a much better version of the story than I even really concocted in my head, and I thought that we were going to get out of this film. And I love when a movie can surprise me like that. I love when a movie can subvert your expectations in a way, though, that you didn't even know you wanted, and improve the story significantly by doing that. And I think that's riddled throughout this entire film. Like, this is not going to be the traditional, 28 Years Later zombie film, that you think you're going to get, and with all the zombie gore and the infected being the main threat. That's not what you get here, but I think the movie was still well done and masterful in its own sense by not going that direction. And I have to say, I'm not always the biggest fan of needle drops in films. This movie has two that audibly got a reaction out of me. And that's the furthest I'm going to say from that. If you've seen the movie, you probably know which two I'm talking about. And yeah, that's pretty much all I'll go into. But the needle drops in this film were very well executed and very well done. I also think that if you're not a person who enjoyed 28 Years Later, this movie actually, with the context it provides, might actually improve that film for you. I went back. I didn't get to watch it before I saw Bone Temple, but after watched Bone Temple, I went back and watched that 28 Years Later movie, and I actually think that it improves the experience because there's certain things and certain contexts you get in this movie that makes that movie feel a little bit more important and feel like there was things set up there that are going to be paid off in this film and in that third film that's hopefully still coming. So I think this movie, if you're not a fan, I mean, even if you were a fan, I think this movie gives proper context to 28 Years Later and actually makes that more of an improvement on a rewatch, in my opinion. And boy, without going into spoilers, I will say where this film leaves off at and the setup that it does for part three, I absolutely cannot wait to see that movie. I am so excited at where I think that the third film is going and where this trilogy is going to wrap up. They really set up some things here, not even just at the ending, too, because there's kind of like not a post-credit scene, but like a little stinger at the end that is basically like the. It was kind of like how it was in 28 Years Later, where you get the Jimmy crew right at the end. They have something like that here, done much better in this film, in my opinion. But also, I think there were nuggets that were left in the actual movie itself, and it gives you an idea of where we're going in part three, and I can't wait to see that. I am super excited. I really hope it lives up to the quality of this film because I really, really enjoyed this film. And this is a really solid entry. Like I said, I think this is my favorite sequel in the 28 Days franchise. And I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to revisit it. I want to see it again. And I'm gonna get it when it comes out on Blu-ray and probably rewatch it a few times because I think it's such a layered movie. And has probably much more that you'll take from it on a rewatch. And bring on part three as soon as we can. Let's get that thing greenlit and let's get it into production because I want to see it. But even though I am gushing over this movie and I really, really did love this film, there is a few issues that I had with the movie. First being that I do think that not having like the visual style of Danny Boyle, you can feel that missing here. I talked about at the beginning how I think every film in this franchise offers something like visually unique with each film. That is getting to be a little frustrating though because there's no consistency throughout this franchise. I think, you get the same type of visual style from 28 Days Later as you did in 28 Years Later. Obviously, Years is a little bit more modern. And then I think that this film takes visually more from 28 Weeks Later, which is just to say that it's like a basic standard horror film. There's not a whole lot visually that is as unique as what you got in the original film and then 28 Years. So anyone who's a big fan of that, which I was, I that's one of the parts and one of the reasons I love that original film so much, and I love 28 Years Later, you're going to feel a little disappointed that it doesn't have that same kind of unique visual style. I also think that there is some dangling plot threads that don't get addressed in this film from 28 Years Later, particularly the character of Aaron Taylor Johnson, where he was left in 28 Years Later, the fact that we go through all the events in this movie and he's not even addressed and we don't see him. I felt like a pretty big missed opportunity. Now I'm aware they're probably going to have him in part three and probably wrap up that storyline from there. But that felt like a really big omission. And then the implications in 28 Years Later on the missing baby. The one that was the zombie gave birth to in the bus. There's no mention of that either, which I thought that was a pretty big dangling plot thread from 28 Years Later, and then we just don't address it again here. So even as excited as I am for part three, a part of me wonders, what is, like, how much are we going to have to get done with part three? Because there was stuff set up as well, like I said, in this film, too, that I feel like is going to kind of imply as to where part three is going. So that worries me a little bit as excited as I am for part three. It does feel like there's a lot that we're going to have to get into. So, let's pray we get enough runtime and we can still keep it like I want it to have the visual style of 28 years, but with like the very condensed and tight writing that we got with Bone Temple. That's my hope for part three. So I hope that they can conjure that together and make it happen. And then for my last negative, I will say I think the character of Spike was a little bit shortchanged in this film. He obviously is a part of the Jimmy Gang, but when we're going through that storyline, he kind of takes a back seat, to the other characters in the Jimmy Gang, which I didn't mind because I thought they were great, and I thought the storyline that they were giving these characters was fantastic. But for Spike being such, I mean, he was basically the main character 28 years later. So for him to be the main character in that, and then to kind of get so shortchanged here, did feel a little underwhelming for like his arc that we're going with. But obviously, again, I wonder what they're leaving for part three, and whether or not they'll be able to successfully navigate all of these kind of dangling plot threads that we had. But again, overall, guys, I really, really love this movie. This is the standard for me for 2026. This is the movie I'm going to compare to others and say, hey, if you were good, were you better than the Bone Temple? That's where we're at right now. Knowing my taste, knowing what I love, I would be very surprised that this film is not in my top 10 of the year, by the end of 2026. If it's not, then it's been a very good year. I'll say that. I mean, I know there's a lot coming, but this movie was very quality. So if it's not there, we got a great year in cinema coming, and I can't wait. But yeah, no, go ahead and comment below. Let me know what you thought. Like I said, I really enjoyed this movie. I think the reception has been pretty well. I know box office wise, it has been struggling a little bit, but I hope, the studio and Sony kind of doesn't get too heavy into that and into that narrative. I know they originally greenlit the part 3 already before Bone Temple came out because the reception was so well for it. But I'm hoping that they don't, kind of course correct on that and cancel part 3. I hope they go ahead. I think that there is a strong fan. I think this is going to help, rebound because that first 28 years film was so divisive. I think this one will get the faith back and will get the hype back going into a part 3. So go ahead, comment below, let me know what you thought about the Bone Temple. What are your theories? Where do you think it's going in part 3? Are you excited for part 3? Comment below, let me know. Like I said, I know I'm getting these reviews out late. I was sick, so I'm gonna have reviews popping out here every other day essentially, on the movies I missed. I should be seeing, I did see actually Return to Silent Hill, so look out for that review. That should be fun. And then I'm going to go see Mercy and Send Help this week, so look out for those reviews as well. And then I am probably going to also get back into ranking the movies I see monthly, and going from there, so, watch out for that video as well. But that's it for me today, guys. Everyone, have a great night.